Picture waking up on a Friday night in March 1993. The weatherman had been talking about snow for days, but this was the South, and snow did not happen here. Not really. Then you heard it, a roar like a freight train. The walls shook, the windows rattled, and somewhere in the darkness, the Gulf of Mexico was rising, rushing inland, swallowing everything in its path. This was not just another storm. This was the storm of the century. And before it was over, it would touch 26 states, kill more than 300 people, and remind 120 million Americans just how small we are when nature decides to remind us who is really in charge. If you lived through March 1993 on the East Coast, you remember exactly where you were. You remember the snow, the wind, the darkness when the power died. And you remember the silence afterward, that strange, muffled quiet when the world had been buried under feet of white. This is the story of the weekend America stood still. The signs came early, but nobody wanted to believe them. By March 8th, 5 full days before the storm hit, forecasters at the National Weather Service were staring at their computer screens with growing dread. The models were showing something they had never seen before. 3 separate weather systems were about to collide over the Gulf of Mexico. Cold Arctic air was pushing down from Canada. Moisture was streaming up from the tropics. A disturbance was rolling in from the Pacific. When these 3 forces merged, they would create a monster. For the first time in American history, meteorologists issued blizzard warnings 2 full days in advance. States of emergency were declared before a single flake had fallen. In Florida, Alabama, and Georgia, people shrugged it off. Snow? Here? That is a northern problem. We will be fine. They were not fine, not even close. Thursday came and went. The sky was blue. Temperatures in the 70s. People in Knoxville, Tennessee, wore short sleeves. Kids in Atlanta played outside until dark. In Florida, tourists packed the beaches, soaking in the March sun. 2 days. They had 2 days left of normal life. 2 days before everything changed. Friday, March 12th, started like any other day. But by afternoon, the sky began to darken. The barometric pressure dropped. If you were paying attention, if you had a barometer on your wall or an ache in your bones that told you weather was coming, you felt it. Something was wrong. Something big was on the way. And by nightfall, America would understand. The storm announced itself in Florida just after midnight on Saturday, March 13th. But this was not snow. This was something far worse. A wall of thunderstorms, a derecho, swept across the Gulf of Mexico with winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. Lightning cracked across the sky, 59,000 bolts in a single night, turning the darkness into a strobe light of terror. And then came the water. Along Florida's Gulf Coast, families were torn from sleep by a sound they'd never heard before. A rushing, roaring surge. The Gulf of Mexico was coming for them. In Taylor County, a 12-foot wall of water crashed into coastal communities without warning. People who had gone to bed thinking about their Saturday morning plans woke up fighting for their lives. One family's child, just 12 years old, survived by clinging to wooden beams as waves crashed through his home. As each wave struck, he had to jump to keep his head above water. The Gulf water, impossibly, was warmer than the freezing air above it. When the waves retreated, the cold bit so deeply that he dove underwater just to escape it. 13 people drowned in Taylor County alone. More died across Florida's coastline. In Levy County, an F2 tornado touched down, tearing through mobile homes, launching debris like missiles through the dark. 3 people died there before they ever knew what hit them. By the time the sun rose over Florida, 47 people were dead. 18,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and communities that had never seen anything like this were struggling to understand what had happened. Meanwhile, in Cuba, the same squall line was doing even worse damage. 10 people died. Over $1 billion in losses. The storm did not respect borders, nationalities, or expectations. It simply destroyed whatever was in its way. The barometric pressure readings coming out of Florida were terrifying. Tallahassee recorded 28.8 inches of mercury, a reading you would expect from a Category 2 or 3 hurricane, not a winter storm. Records fell in 12 states. This was not just a blizzard. This was something that should not have been possible, and the storm was just getting started. As Saturday morning broke, the monster turned north, and it began to snow. Now, snow in Alabama was rare. Snow in Georgia was a novelty. But what fell that weekend wasn't a dusting. It wasn't a few pretty flakes to admire from the window. This was a burial. Birmingham, Alabama, a city that barely owned snowplows, recorded 13 inches. The temperature plummeted to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest in decades. People who had never driven in snow found themselves stranded on highways as visibility dropped to 0. In the mountains of Georgia, the snow piled higher. Union County reported 35 inches, 3 feet of snow in the deep south. Roads vanished. Cars disappeared. Entire communities were cut off from the outside world. The weight of the snow, heavy and wet, collapsed roofs across the region. Factory buildings in the south, built for heat, not blizzards, buckled and fell. Carpet mills, warehouses, and stores simply gave way under a burden they were never designed to bear. For those who lost power, and millions did, Saturday night became a test of survival. In homes built for mild winters, families huddled together in a single room, burning whatever they could find for warmth. No central heating, no backup generators, just blankets, prayers, and each other. The cold crept in through windows, under doors, through every crack in walls that had never needed to keep out this kind of chill. And still, the snow kept falling. The thing about snow in the South is that nobody knows how to handle it. There are no salt trucks waiting in garages. There are no chains for tires. People don't own snow shovels because they've never needed them. So when the snow started falling and didn't stop, when it piled up inch after inch, hour after hour, the entire region simply shut down. Grocery stores had been cleaned out on Friday by people who half believed the warnings. Bread, milk, batteries, gone. The ones who hadn't stocked up found themselves stuck with whatever was in the pantry. Gas stations ran dry as people tried to flee, then ran out of gas on highways going nowhere. Some folks sat in their cars for hours, engines running, heat blasting, watching the snow pile up around them until they had no choice but to abandon their vehicles and walk. The highways became graveyards of frozen cars. Mile after mile, vehicles sat buried up to their windows, their owners long gone. The plows, what few there were, couldn't keep up. For every inch they cleared, 2 more fell. By Saturday night, travel was simply impossible. If you hadn't gotten where you were going, you weren't getting there at all. By Saturday afternoon, the storm was climbing the Appalachian Mountains, and this is where it became legendary. Mount LeConte in Tennessee recorded 56 inches of snow, nearly 5 feet. Mount Mitchell in North Carolina saw 50 inches, with drifts piling up to 14 feet high. The Great Smoky Mountains, those ancient rolling peaks, disappeared under a blanket of white so thick that entire hiking trails vanished. Hundreds of people were trapped in those mountains. Families in cabins. Campers who had thought the weather would hold. Groups of hikers, including dozens of high school students from Michigan on a spring break trip, found themselves stranded with no way out and no help coming. The roads were impassable. The phones were dead. For days, they waited. rationing food, melting snow for water, hoping someone knew where they were. Helicopter crews eventually rescued more than 200 hikers from the Smokies. Volunteer pilots risked their lives flying through unstable weather to airlift emergency supplies to families trapped in remote hollows. These were not dramatic rescues you see in movies. They were quiet acts of desperation and courage, performed by ordinary people who refused to let their neighbors freeze. The storm did not discriminate. It did not care if you were rich or poor, prepared or not. It buried everything equally. Syracuse, New York, recorded 43 inches of snow, with 35 inches falling in just 24 hours, an all-time record. The wind howled at hurricane force, gusting above 70 miles per hour at LaGuardia Airport and above 140 miles per hour at Mount Washington in New Hampshire. Snowdrifts climbed to 35 feet in some areas of the Appalachians, burying homes up to their second floors, swallowing cars whole. Every major airport on the East Coast closed, every single one. From Halifax, Nova Scotia to Tampa, Florida, the runways went silent. This was unprecedented. It produced the most weather-related flight cancellations in American history up to that point. Thousands of travelers found themselves stranded in terminals, in hotels, and in their cars on frozen highways. Interstate highways from Atlanta to Boston became parking lots, then graveyards of abandoned vehicles as drivers simply gave up and walked away. Think about that for a moment. Every airport from Canada to Florida closed. In a nation that had grown used to air travel and that depended on it, the skies went silent. Terminal halls that usually buzzed with rushing passengers became campsites. Families slept on floors. Business travelers shared blankets with strangers. The few restaurants still open ran out of food. Vending machines went empty. And people waited, not knowing when or if they would get home. In New Jersey, something strange fell from the sky. 2.5 inches of sleet landed on top of 12 inches of snow, creating an ice cream sandwich effect. The sleet formed a crust so hard you could walk on top of the snow without breaking through. Beneath it, the powder was still soft, making digging nearly impossible. Cars sat encased in ice, their doors frozen shut, their engines silent. On Long Island, the storm surge did not just damage homes, it destroyed them. At least 18 houses fell into the sea, their foundations undermined by the relentless pounding surf. Families watched their entire lives wash away into the Atlantic. The Outer Banks of North Carolina fared no better. 200 homes became uninhabitable in a single weekend. Some slid down cliffs, others simply filled with water and never dried out. In Virginia, the Lancerlot Sports Arena collapsed under the weight of the snow. A Lowe's store in Christiansburg crumbled. Across the region, buildings that had stood for decades could not take the pressure. The structural damage was catastrophic. And out at sea, the storm was claiming more lives. The Gulf of Mexico became a death trap. Waves reached 65 feet, mountains of water that swallowed boats whole. A 200-foot freighter sank 70 miles off Fort Myers, Florida. The Coast Guard launched its largest rescue operation in memory, deploying over 100 planes, helicopters, and boats. They saved 235 people, but 48 more were never found, lost to the cold, gray depths of the Atlantic and the Gulf. For those on land without power, and there were 10 million of them, survival became a daily grind. Power outages lasted 1 to 2 weeks in some rural areas. Crews could not reach downed lines through the snow-blocked roads. In the mountains, electricity did not return for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cold nights, of cooking over fires, of waiting and wondering when the world would start working again. Imagine 3 weeks without power in March. 3 weeks of cold showers, if you were lucky enough to have water pressure. 3 weeks of spoiled food, of reading by candlelight, of going to bed when the sun went down because there was nothing else to do. Some families moved in with relatives who had power. Others simply toughed it out, layering blankets on their beds, wearing their coats indoors, exhaling clouds of visible breath in their own living rooms. Heroes were the utility crews in those weeks. Linemen from states that had not been touched by the storm drove hundreds of miles to help. They worked 18-hour days in bitter cold, climbing poles, splicing lines, restoring power one house at a time. Nobody asked where they came from. Nobody cared. They were angels in hard hats, and every time a light flickered back on in a darkened neighborhood, someone wept with relief. Most of the storm's deaths did not come from drowning or freezing, though many did. Most came from heart attacks. Men and women, middle-aged and older, went outside to shovel their driveways and collapsed in the snow. Their hearts simply could not take the strain. In neighborhood after neighborhood, the same scene played out. A shovel dropped, a body crumpled, a family shattered. The cold that followed the storm was almost as dangerous as the storm itself. Record low temperatures swept across the eastern United States. Birmingham hit 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Mobile, Alabama, dropped to 21 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that city had never planned for. Rochester, New York, fell to -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Burlington, Vermont, fell to -12 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chills plunged below -20 degrees Fahrenheit in the Carolina Mountains. For homes still without power, the cold was relentless, seeping through walls, numbing fingers, threatening the very young and the very old. But here is what the headlines did not capture. In the midst of all this chaos, something else was happening. Something quiet, something profoundly American. People helped each other, not because they had to, not because anyone was watching, because that is what you do when the world falls apart. Neighbors who had never spoken knocked on each other's doors. Is your heat working? Do you have enough food? Is everyone okay? The storm stripped away the walls we build between ourselves and left only the bare human need to look out for one another. Strangers with four-wheel drive trucks became lifelines, ferrying the sick to hospitals, bringing supplies to the stranded. Young men who might have spent the weekend watching basketball instead spent it checking on elderly neighbors, shoveling driveways, carrying groceries through snow that came up to their waists. No one asked for credit. No one expected thanks. It was simply what needed to be done. Churches opened their doors as warming centers, feeding whoever walked in, asking nothing in return. Soup kitchens that usually served a few dozen suddenly served hundreds. Shelters overflowed with families who had lost power, lost heat, lost hope. Volunteers showed up day after day to make sure no one froze. Farmers in the Carolina mountains, cut off for days, shared their provisions with anyone who needed them. They butchered hogs and smoked meat. They shared eggs and milk from animals that still needed tending, storm or no storm. In communities where people had lived as neighbors for generations, the old ways of helping returned. No questions asked, no ledger kept. Just neighbors helping neighbors, the way it had always been done. The National Guard was deployed in state after state. But it was not just the Guard. It was ordinary people doing extraordinary things. A man with a snowmobile checking on elderly neighbors 5 miles down a buried road. A woman walking through waist-deep snow to bring medicine to a diabetic friend. Communities that had been strangers on Thursday were family by Sunday. In East Tennessee, children made the best of it. Schools were closed for days, and the frozen world became a playground. Sleds made from plastic bins and cookie sheets flew down every hill. Snowball fights lasted until hands went numb. Kids came home soaked and grinning, cheeks red with cold, eyes bright with adventure. For them, this was not a disaster. It was the best week of their lives. The cleanup took weeks. In some places, snow lingered into April. The economic toll was staggering. $5.5 billion in 1993 dollars, nearly $12 billion today. It remains one of the costliest winter storms in American history. The human toll was worse. More than 300 people died. Countless more were injured. Families who lost everything they had. But the storm of 1993 changed things. Cities that had never needed winter emergency plans created them. Building codes in the South were re-examined. Forecasting technology improved. The storm that caught so many off guard became a lesson. And the next time the models showed a monster forming, people listened. For those who lived through it, the blizzard of 1993 is not just a story, it is a scar. It is the weekend they learned that nature does not care about your plans. It is the cold that crept into their bones and did not leave for weeks. It is the neighbor who showed up with a shovel and stayed until the job was done. If you remember the storm of the century, you remember the fear. That moment when the lights went out and you realized you were on your own. But you also remember the warmth, not from a furnace, because those were dead, but from people. From strangers who became friends. From a country that, when it was pushed to its knees, got back up together. The snow eventually melted. The power came back. The airports reopened. Life returned to something like normal. But the people who survived that weekend never forgot it. They could not. Because the winter of 1993 taught America something important. Not about weather, not about forecasting, about each other. That when everything freezes, when the lights go out, when the snow piles so high you cannot see over it, what gets you through is not technology. It is not preparation. It is your neighbor. It is the stranger with a truck. It is the church with the open door. The storm of the century took so much, but it also revealed something we sometimes forget, that underneath all our differences, we still know how to take care of each other. And when the world turns cold, that warmth is what saves us. Were you there in March 1993? Did you live through the storm of the century? Drop a comment below and share your story. Hit subscribe to keep these memories alive. If this brought back something you had almost forgotten, share it with someone who remembers. These stories matter. They are our history. We should never let them fade. Until next time, stay safe out there. And remember, no storm lasts forever.